Heather sat in the nursery's rocking chair, her hand gently resting on her swollen belly as sunlight streamed through soft white curtains. The walls, painted a muted lavender, bore woodland animal decals dancing between floating bookshelves. She took a slow breath, inhaling the faint scent of baby lotion and fresh cotton, letting the moment ground her. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel imaginary, it felt earned. Michael peeked in from the hallway holding a mug. Decaf chamomile. Just how you like it, he said with a smile that still had the power to make her heart flip. Thank you, Heather whispered, accepting the cup and resting it carefully on the side table. She kicked again a minute ago. Right here. She took his hand and guided it to her belly. Michael beamed. She already knows she's loved. Years of fertility treatments, tears cried in sterile waiting rooms, and losses mourned in silence had brought Heather to this moment. Her pregnancy had not been easy, but every ache felt like a gift. The baby had passed the viability mark. Her heartbeat was strong. Every ultrasound brought a sigh of relief and a small celebration. With the baby shower set for the coming weekend, Heather allowed herself hope. Stephanie had agreed to help plan, and while their relationship had never been smooth, Heather clung to the possibility of reconciliation. Maybe becoming mothers, Heather now, Stephanie someday, might finally draw them closer. She adjusted one of the stuffed animals on the shelf, a plush fox, its smile mirroring her own. Everything, she believed, was finally falling into place. Sunlight filtered gently through the gauzy curtains, casting a golden warmth over the living room where guests mingled with plates of finger foods and pastel pink cupcakes. Heather stood near the window, one hand resting on her rounded belly. Her closest friends, co-workers, and a few relatives buzzed with laughter and anticipation, admiring the tiny onesies hanging from a decorative clothesline strung above the fireplace. For Heather, the day was supposed to be a celebration of new beginnings, a long-awaited joy after years of silent heartbreak. Holding her husband Michael's hand and feeling the soft, reassuring kicks of baby Emma beneath her dress, she had allowed herself a rare moment of peace. Then Stephanie arrived. Late, loud, and already a little unsteady, Stephanie breezed into the room like a storm. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the wood floor, drawing every eye. Their mother, Rebecca, embraced her tightly, her smile faltering only when she glanced at Heather. Heather forced a gracious smile. She'd promised herself she would rise above any tension today. The toast came at the end of gift opening. Stephanie lifted a glass, demanded attention with a slurred, "Listen up," and started with flattery. But then her tone shifted. I just think people should know, she said, eyes narrowing, that this whole sweet perfect mama act might not be the whole story. Heather's been keeping secrets. Medical ones. The room went quiet. Heather froze. Stephanie's words pierced the hush, speaking of ultrasound results she should never have known, twisting facts into reckless accusations. Gasps, someone dropping a plate, Michael reaching for Heather. But the worst hadn't come yet. Seconds later, the kick landed. And everything shattered. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, the soft clink of glasses accompanying cheerful voices. Heather stood near the pastel cake table, one hand resting protectively on her rounded belly, the other clutching a gift bag from her coworker Lauren. She was soaked in a strange mixture of joy and unease, but she couldn't quite pinpoint why. The baby shower was perfect on the surface, decorated in neutral tones, tiny star-shaped cookies, a stack of diapers shaped like an owl. Still, something in her sister's eyes unsettled her. Stephanie had arrived 15 minutes late, sunglasses still on indoors and balancing a mimosa like it was an accessory. Her hugs were stiff and sideways. Her comments had been thinly veiled jabs all afternoon, but Heather had smiled through them. For peace. For unity. Until Stephanie stepped forward, eyes glassy, voice too loud, and announced, "You're all fussing over a baby she says might not even make it. Didn't tell you that, did she?" Gasps echoed. Heather's heart froze. Stephanie grinned as if unveiling a party trick, then continued, "I saw your doctor's notes, Heather. You left them out, remember?" Heather took a step back, pain knitting across her abdomen as panic roared through her veins. Before anyone could intervene, Stephanie's face contorted, rage overtaking sarcasm, and in one horrific moment, she lashed out with her leg. The impact knocked Heather backward, her arms wrapping instinctively around her belly as pain crashed in waves. Screams followed. Then darkness. Everything changed in that instant, every bond, every illusion shattered on contact. The ambulance lights cast flickering reds and whites across the inside of the vehicle as Heather lay strapped to a stretcher, eyes wide, heart pounding faster than she could comprehend. The cold bite of the oxygen mask on her face didn't deter the images replaying in her mind. Stephanie's unhinged rant, the sudden jolt of pain, and the gasps filling the baby shower. It had all unraveled so quickly. Michael's voice trembled from beside her as he held her hand as tight as he dared. He was trying to stay strong, but Heather could feel the tremor in his grip. "Stay with me, okay?" he whispered, brushing a lock of her damp hair away from her forehead. Heather's thoughts struggled to form words. She wanted to talk. She wanted to ask about the baby, but her throat was too tight. Every bump in the road jolted her belly. She could still feel their child shifting inside her, moving, kicking, a small, terrified reassurance. A paramedic's voice sliced through the panic. "Vitals ho. Elding. Full-term fetus still active. Get Ob on standby." Heather tried to stay calm, focusing on feeling rather than imagining. The sharp edge of betrayal pressed down harder than the pain. All she'd ever wanted was peace, unity, her sister at her side, celebrating the life Heather had fought so hard to create. And instead, she was staring at sterile white ceilings, trying to decipher whether her baby was fighting for its life. Tears rolled silently. Not from fear alone, but grief. Something inside her had shifted, and it wasn't just physical. Something quiet inside had broken wide open. Heather blinked against the hospital ceiling's harsh light, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor dragging her back to consciousness. Pain bloomed across her abdomen, dull but unrelenting. Michael clutched her hand, eyes red, lips pressed in a desperate line. "You're okay," he whispered. "Emma's okay. They're monitoring everything." The words struggled to land in her disoriented mind. Then it all came rushing back. The baby shower, Stephanie's slurred accusations, the sudden blow to her belly. A phlebotomy chart hung crooked at the end of her bed. Next to it, a folder. Her medical folder. A nurse quietly entered, checking her vitals. When Heather asked about the folder, the woman hesitated. "Security's looking into it," she said. "Apparently your sister accessed medical files she had no authorization to see." Heather's breath caught. "What?" "She used credentials that weren't hers." "You're not the first to raise concerns. But what she did, sharing private medical details at your shower, it's serious." "Serious." That word echoed louder than her pulse. Michael pulled his chair closer. "Heather, she stole your privacy. Violated trust. That wasn't a sister being careless. It was someone trying to destroy you." Heather stared at the 4-line in her hand. Stephanie hadn't just erupted in drunken cruelty. She'd pre-planned it. Crossed legal and emotional lines no family member ever should. In that moment, something inside Heather shifted. She wasn't just a daughter or a sister. She was a mother now. It was no longer an option to hope Stephanie would change or wait for Rebecca's arbitrary approval. She had to protect her baby. No matter what or who, it caused the beeping of machines and the sterile scent of the hospital room wrapped around Heather like a cold fog. Her body ached, but the dull throb was nothing compared to the storm uncoiling inside her. Her hand instinctively rested on her belly as Emma's tiny flutters stirred beneath her skin, a sign of fragile but persistent life. She was still there, still fighting. Tears welled up, but they came from clarity, not just pain. For so long, Heather had tried to believe that if she were kind enough, patient enough, loyal enough, her family would love her the way she needed. That if she endured their cruelty quietly, it would one day be repaid with acceptance. But looking at the 4 in her arm and the bruises along her side, she realized love that must be earned through suffering isn't love at all. When Detective Morales gently explained to her that Stephanie had used hospital access codes to retrieve sensitive information about Emma's development weeks earlier, something inside Heather shifted. This wasn't drunken recklessness. Stephanie invaded her privacy, weaponized her vulnerability, and almost jeopardized her child's life. Heather felt something rise inside her, not rage, but resolve. There were lines that should never be crossed, boundaries meant to protect the innocent. Emma deserved a mother who would fight for her without apology. No more silence. No more making excuses for people who confused love with control. As Michael stood at her bedside, holding her hand with trembling strength, Heather whispered, "I'm done protecting their image. From now on, I protect us." And for the first time in her life, she truly meant it. Heather sat silently in the hospital's dim recovery room, the soft beeping of machines echoing around her like faint reminders of how thin the line had become between safety and chaos. Her hand instinctively moved over her belly, gently resting where her daughter still stirred, alive, but shaken. The next morning, a nurse arrived with devastating confirmation. Stephanie had accessed Heather's private medical records using login credentials from a mutual friend at the health consultancy. It was illegal. It was deeply personal. And it was the strike that crossed an unspoken line. Heather didn't cry. Not this time. Something in her had shifted overnight, an awakening born not from rage but resolve. Michael returned with folders in hand, medical reports, police forms, and the beginnings of a protective order. Heather signed each one with a steady hand. "I'm not doing this for revenge," she said to herself. "I'm doing this because my daughter deserves a mother who doesn't stay quiet anymore." Stephanie's betrayal wasn't just cruel. It was calculated, fueled by long-standing jealousy and emboldened by years of family dysfunction. Heather had once excused so much, harsh words, passive slights, even being left out, but assaulting her unborn child was the boundary no one would come back from. She made the calls to a lawyer, to the hospital's privacy officer, to the sheriff's department. With Michael's quiet support at every step, Heather began drawing her lines in the sand. No more justifying. No more second chances. As the sun set over the hospital's parking lot, Heather whispered to her baby, "We're safe now. And I won't let anyone cross us again." The hospital room buzzed quietly with the hum of machines and the muffled footsteps of passing nurses. Heather sat propped against the pillows, her hand protectively resting on her belly as Michael gently adjusted her blanket. The fear had begun to subside, replaced now by clarity. Stephanie's assault wasn't an accident, it was a choice, backed by premeditated cruelty. Detective V. Morales entered the room with a tablet and a gentle demeanor. "Heather, I understand this is difficult," he began. "But we need a full statement if we're going to pursue charges. What happened at the baby shower? This goes far beyond family conflict." Heather nodded slowly. Sitting up straighter, her voice was soft but steadfast. "She accessed my medical files without consent. She used them to shame me. She wanted to humiliate me in public, and then she attacked me. That's not family. That's criminal." Over the next few hours, Heather described the stolen medical forms, the words Stephanie snarled at her, and the moment her sister's foot connected with her swollen abdomen. Morales listened carefully, asking questions, noting witnesses, and confirming the hospital's evidence of a placental tear. Later, Heather met with a hospital administrator and a legal advisor. Her files had been downloaded from the patient portal under Stephanie's IP address. It was enough to build a breach of privacy case. HIPAA laws were clear. This was more than a family betrayal. It was a legal violation. As Michael scribbled his own statement beside her, Heather felt strength return to her limbs. This wasn't just about punishing Stephanie, it was about drawing a line once and for all. She was defending not just herself, but her daughter, her future, and the love she was determined to protect. Heather lay in the hospital bed, the rhythmic beeping of monitors echoing louder than her thoughts. Her body was aching, but the emotional toll eclipsed the physical pain. Her hands rested protectively over her abdomen, and despite the chaos, one truth finally settled within her. She couldn't pretend anymore. Michael sat beside her, quietly holding her hand. The nurse had just confirmed the baby's heartbeat remained strong, an immense relief, yet Heather's mind was racing. Guilt, fury, disbelief. But beneath them all, a rising strength. She had tolerated Stephanie's jealousy for years, bent over backward to please her mother, hoping to repair a family that never protected her. Not anymore. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Detective Ramirez entered, her tone kind but firm. "We have reason to believe your sister accessed your hospital records without permission. Did you ever share that information with her?" Heather shook her head. "No, never." The implications clicked into place. Stephanie had illegally accessed her medical information and weaponized it to shame her, to hurt her. That wasn't just dysfunction. That was criminal. In that moment, something inside Heather sharpened. This wasn't about revenge. It was survival. For herself. For Emma. She turned to Michael, voice steady. I want to press charges. He nodded, eyes resolute. Then that's what we'll do. For the first time, Heather wasn't shrinking to keep the peace. She was setting fire to the illusion that keeping family meant keeping quiet. This was the beginning, not of vengeance, but of reclamation. Her story wasn't ending in tragedy. It was just beginning. On her terms, Heather sat in the nursery's rocking chair, her hand resting gently over her belly. The pale green walls were bathed in the soft evening light, casting shadows of the mobile above the crib, tiny clouds and stars gently spinning in the breeze from the window. For the first time in a long time, Heather felt still. Not at peace entirely, but rooted. Present. The storm had not passed, but she had crossed into calmer shores. She thought back to the hospital, machines beeping, Michael's frantic eyes, the quiet hum of doctors determining whether her baby would be okay. And for the first time, Heather realized the betrayal wasn't just that Stephanie attacked her. It was that she had spent her whole life telling herself these kinds of wounds from family didn't count unless she acknowledged them. That loyalty came before safety, before truth. When the detective said the hospital had proof of Stephanie accessing her records, she hadn't cried. She had nodded, like part of her already knew. What shocked her wasn't the crime, it was the clarity. Clearer than she'd ever felt. She didn't know anyone's silence anymore. She stood that day not as a victim, but as a mother. Not born out of guilt or obligation, but out of fierce love for her child and herself. Breaking the chains didn't feel violent. It felt quiet, steady, necessary. Heather looked at the raspberry-colored baby blanket folded across the crib. A gift from Lauren, stitched with Emma's initials. A new lineage, she thought, a new story. One built on boundaries, healing, and a love that chose her back. The courtroom was colder than Heather expected. Not in temperature, though she clutched her shawl around her shoulders, but in tone. The whispers as she walked past the gallery, the absent glance Rebecca gave her from across the aisle, and the way Stephanie, dressed in a pale blue blazer like she'd shown up for a seminar, avoided Heather's gaze entirely. It all felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's story unfold. But it was hers. It was her baby. And today was about making sure no one ever threatened that life again. Heather sat beside her attorney, her posture upright, hands folded over the soft curve of her post-birth middle. Emma was safe now, healthy, but it hadn't always been that way. Weeks earlier, she'd feared they'd both perish because of one person's rage. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, Exhibit C shows that the defendant entered the hospital's patient portal using unauthorized credentials. The pediatric report was accessed, quoted, and used publicly, leading to irreversible emotional and psychological harm. Gasps rose in the gallery. Stephanie flinched. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. Heather didn't move. Witnesses testified, friends from the baby shower, nurses from the hospital. Each account formed a scar, a mosaic of pain Heather had endured for years, not just that day. And still, she held her head high. When the judge finally asked Heather if she wished to speak, she rose slowly. Her voice was calm, clear. This isn't just about what happened, she said. It's about what I'm willing to risk to protect my daughter. Harm done in the name of family is still harm. And silence is no longer an option. Rain tapped gently against the hospital window as Heather stared out, her arms cradling her swollen belly. She had been discharged a week ago, but the ache, emotional more than physical, lingered deep in her chest. Her daughter, now named Emma, squirmed occasionally with quiet flutters inside her, as if reassuring her mother that she was still with her. Still fighting. Still strong. The truth had come pouring out in waves since that day. The story had spread first across family lines, then among coworkers, neighbors, and finally on a wider social platform after Heather made a quiet but firm statement online. She hadn't named names, just shared a truth that had weighed her down for years. The pain of being treated as second to someone who did not hesitate to harm her. The fallout was quick. Her mother called, cried, threatened. Stephanie scoffed online and attempted to tell her side of the story, claiming Heather fabricated things for attention. But the guest list had its own voice. Several attendees, disturbed by what they'd witnessed at the baby shower, stepped forward without prompt. Together, their testimonies formed a quilt of truth, one that no spin could twist. Michael never left Heather's side. His quiet strength anchored her when her heart wavered. Her father, James, wrote her a letter of apology, then another, addressed to the courts, outlining the verbal manipulation and favoritism he had silently watched for decades. The cost of truth was high. Relationships fractured, trust shattered. But every step forward felt like breathing again. For the first time, Heather understood. Peace was never found in silence, it was earned by speaking. By facing the storm, the hospital room was dimly lit, its quiet hum interrupted only by the steady rhythm of monitors and hushed footsteps in the hallway. Heather lay motionless on the sterile bed, her hand resting protectively over her belly. Michael sat at her side, his fingers laced tightly with hers, anchoring them both through the fear that had eclipsed the past 48 hours. Though the trauma still lingered heavily in the air, there was an odd sense of peace inside the room, a calm before the moment that would change their lives forever. A doctor entered gently, her voice kind but focused. "Heather, it's time. We need to deliver the baby to protect both of you." Heather nodded, the tears already spilling over. Not from fear this time, but something else, hope maybe. Strength. What had once been an uncertain path now led straight into the light of something undeniable. Motherhood. The operating room was cold, but Heather's heart burned with fierce determination. The world slowed as the C-section began. Michael at her side, whispering encouragement into her ear. Then, suddenly, a cry. Startled at first, then unstoppable, the sound pierced the room and settled into every corner of Heather's soul. Her daughter was here. Emma Grace Wilson, the nurse whispered, placing the tiny, pink bundle into Heather's arms. Heather stared at her daughter, overwhelmed. All the pain, the betrayal, the long nights of silent grief, they had led to this miracle. Emma blinked up at her with wide, searching eyes, and Heather knew, with absolute certainty, that everything would be different now. She was a mother, strong, whole, and unbreakable. Daiichi house was quieter now, but it no longer felt lonely, it felt peaceful. The nursery glowed with soft morning light spilling through gauzy curtains, and baby Emma sighed gently in her sleep, nestled in Heather's arms. The storm had passed, literally and figuratively. For so long, Heather had tried to make things right with people who insisted on being wrong to her. But here, in the gentle rhythm of her daughter's breathing, was the only truth she needed. Heather looked around at the gifts strewn across the living room from yesterday's gathering. A second baby shower, surprise hosted by Lauren, her coworkers from school, and Michael's family, had been everything the first wasn't. No drama, no sharp smiles hiding judgment. Just laughter, warm embraces, and genuine joy. Her father had been there too, joyfully holding his granddaughter and slipping handmade booties into her lap. He wasn't perfect, but he had chosen growth. That mattered more than flawless history ever could. There were no layers to peel back here, no tiptoeing on emotional eggshells. Every casserole brought in wasn't just food, it was love. Every card filled with kind prayers was a piece of a new foundation. These connections weren't forged by obligation, but by choice. Michael entered quietly and kissed the top of her head. "You okay?" Heather smiled. "I think. For the first time in a long while, yeah, I really am." Her family had broken her heart, but love, real love, had stitched it back together, piece by piece, with stronger thread. And this family, the one built on kindness, not shared last names, that was the one worth fighting. FORTG soft beeps of the monitor beside my hospital bed had become oddly comforting. For the first time in days, I wasn't overwhelmed with the rage or fear that had consumed me since the baby shower. Emma slept silently in the bassinet beside me, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, living proof that healing was not only possible but already happening. I looked down at my arms, bruised but stronger than they'd ever been. Not because I'd fought back physically, but because I finally stopped letting pain dictate who I needed to be for others. For so long, I thought forgiveness meant silence, that healing meant minimizing the wrongs others had done. But now, I knew better. Healing isn't weakness. It's a radical act of bravery. It's choosing to feel, to face the storm instead of pretending the sky was always clear. I'd begun trauma therapy 2 days after Emma's birth. Michael sat in with me during the first few sessions, his quiet strength anchoring me. I told the therapist how I used to translate my mother's coldness into something I could work with. Maybe if I was perfect enough, she'd change. I spoke of my sister's envy, of how I used to shrink so she could shine. And then I spoke of the day I stopped apologizing for existing. Having Emma was like holding sunlight. She didn't need a perfect mother. She needed a whole one. So I chose to stop bleeding for people who'd never even brought bandages. And that choice? That was the beginning of everything. Teachy hum of conversation faded into the background as I sat beneath the cascade of pastel balloons, my hands resting over my swelling belly. For a brief moment, I felt peace. My closest friends from work, my in-laws, even my childhood neighbor, Mrs. Taylor, had come together to celebrate Emma's upcoming arrival. Michael had gone above and beyond to make this day special. I had even begun to believe, for a fragile fraction of time, that maybe, just maybe, my own family could be part of the joy. Stephanie's arrival was late and loud, perfume trailing behind her like a curtain. There was a brittle smile on her face, one that didn't reach her eyes. Rebecca followed close behind, cold but poised, her greetings superficial. I clung to hope, foolishly, the way I always had. Then it shattered. Stephanie's voice cut through the air like a dropped wine glass. Shouldn't she tell you all about the complication the baby's supposed to have? Or is that just another sympathy grab? I froze. Gasps floated in the room, followed by a stunned silence. I tried to breathe, tried to form words, but before I could, Stephanie stepped closer, then closer still. You should have stayed barren, she spat. Then came the kick. A blur of motion. Pain exploded across my belly, a scream rising from somewhere deep. The room broke into chaos. Michael's arms were around me, voices shouting, someone calling 911. I was rushed out, the decorations, gifts, and leftover cake fading from view as sirens whirled. But beneath the fear, beneath the pain, something ignited. A flame. It was no longer just about surviving this moment. It was about standing. About protecting. This had been a baby shower, but it became my turning point. My shower of strength.